Welcome to Fuzzybutts and Friends. Well, as much as it drives Fuzzybutts all over this place, absolutely crazy, I'm your big dog, Luke Robinson, and I'm happy to have with us, most nearly always, Ginger Morgan. She is the Executive Director of the Puppy Up Foundation. Ginger, how are you?
I am well, surviving the heat, barely.
Yes. July in Memphis is certainly some kind of experience, and it's actually miserable right now because I'm in training for walk 3. So both Grayson and I are having a tough time. But I want to talk about the episode today because it's unique in a number of ways. But it's something that Ginger, you and I both know a little bit about because, the best of my knowledge, PTSD is still sort of a relatively not well known condition. But I can say that I know something a little bit about because I'm pretty confident and I've suffered from something like that after the loss of Malcolm, Murphy, and Hudson. And Ginger, I'm pretty confident that you can say the same thing, right?
Pretty much, yeah. It's a little different than I think what we're going to talk about today, ours, but yeah.
Well, that's precisely why we have the guests on today, because here with us to talk about PTSD and more specifically how Fuzzybutts can help veterans through that. And also TBI, I want to be clear on that, is the founder and executive director of Paws and Stripes, Lindsey Kay. Lindsey, how are you? Welcome to Fuzzybutts and Friends.
Hi, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. First of all, you're in Albuquerque, right?
I am. It is also hot here.
It is. It's a different kind of heat. You're in a different time zone. So thank you for joining us. Let's start off, Lindsey. I read a little bit about your wonderful organization. Let's start off with the history and vision of Paws and Stripes.
Sure. So we are a 12-year-old organization. We were founded in 2010. The inspiration for Paws came from my experiences with a family member who was discharged from the Army and trying to adjust to civilian life while also having been diagnosed with a brain injury, complex PTSD, and some other physical issues. And I had come from working in dog rescue, animal rescue work, and working in veterinary clinics. So initially the thought was just a dog could be helpful somehow, right? And who doesn't need a dog? But what I discovered is that the dog that we had rescued was a lot more intuitive than anticipated, and doing research realized it's really difficult. It's financially prohibitive, actually, in a lot of cases, to get a service dog, particularly at that time for things like brain injuries, post-traumatic stress. It was kind of a new concept to have a service dog assist with those disabilities. And the inspiration was just to help this family member and maybe a few other veterans along the way. And what we found is the need was so great that we grew very, very quickly. So
that's always a good thing and a bad thing, as we know at Ginger totally understands that. Well, I have a quick question before you continue with that. You said it's a challenge to get service dogs into those that have TBI and PTSD, and I'm curious, why is that?
Well, it's, as I mentioned, in 2010, it was a really new concept to have dogs trained to assist, particularly even it's kind of its own niche to work with military veterans that have PTSD, because it's a very different type of assistance that they're providing for those individuals. It doesn't look the same. We don't train the dogs exactly the same as you might for a dog who's assisting with someone who maybe has MS or children with autism, things like that. And so I think that it took some years for organizations to really all come together and figure out what that needed to look like. And even internationally, accreditation standards have changed in recent years. And there's a whole subset of standards just for service dogs that are assisting veterans with PTSD. And the nice thing about what we tried to do in our organization, we started the organization specifically to work with this demographic. So our model was constructed from the inside out, from the perspective of myself and my support system being individuals that are living with this every day, as opposed to people who are kind of looking from the outside in and trying to determine ways of problem solving. we sort of had a little bit of a different perspective, and pairing that with professionals in the field, we've really created sort of this holistic integrative model that uses mental health as a cornerstone, not just training dogs.
I guess what I was sort of, my question was, is it a question of like mental capacity, or was it ever a question of mental capacity because they have PTSD? Because I sort of have a brain chemistry for which there's a stigma, and I'm just curious, was there that sort of stigma that veterans suffering from PTSD and TBI may not have the capacity to care for a companion? Was that the issue? That they had to break through the breakthrough issue, I guess you could say?
Sure. I don't know that I would say that would be the case. I don't think there was a concern about capacity. I think it was more a lack of understanding of what, so PTSD and brain injury fall into the category of what we call invisible disabilities. And so I think that it was something that we hadn't collectively realized was something that needed a service dog or could benefit from a service dog. So I think it's just a lack of knowing at that point. There are different ways.
It's just a good thing. It's just a great thing. It's a wonderful thing that whatever the breakthrough moment was, whatever got you over that inflection point and enabled to all of the organizations become accepting of the notion is a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. It's been a sort of a national and even international conversation over the last 12 years.
But it is a complex issue, and that's exactly what I want to dig into next, because I mentioned in the preface or the little intro is that I do know that there are people that have suffered traumatic experiences and do have what they commonly describe as PTSD, and there are some people there, to me, and in my basic understanding of it is there are myths and there are also realities. So that's what I was looking forward to have you here is, what do we know about it exactly from maybe a psychochemical basis?
What do we know about PTSD?
PTSD specifically.
So post-traumatic stress disorder is the outcome of having experienced trauma. And I mean, most of us have experienced trauma in our lives. Not all of us, however, suffer from PTSD after the fact. So specifically for our clients who are enduring severe trauma, usually trauma that happens concurrently. So exposure multiple times to combat, to death, but also, and I think this is often overlooked, sexual assault as well. Military sexual trauma happens estimated about once every 30 minutes in the military.
Wow.
It's a prevalent.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the level of trauma that you're like as more specifically is almost always a physical, as post-physical, some type of physical trauma. Is that probably a better way to look at it, or is there some type of just psychological component to it as well?
It's both. So
both. Okay.
PTSD is both a physical, so it changes the way that the brain functions.
Okay.
It does actually have a physical shift that happens in your body as well as psychological. So there's multiple dimensions to this. And a lot of what happens when you are introducing new types of therapies is you're just trying to create neural pathways so that you're processing things differently instead of constantly being in this fight or flight. It resets your nervous system essentially so that you don't have the same baseline to bring yourself down the way that people who are not suffering from PTSD do, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a very, very powerful concept in cancer research, which is where I'm not sure how much you know about the Puppy Out Foundation. And to sort of my background, I've lost 3 dogs to cancer. And so our foundation, we try to understand the link between cancer and our companion animals and cancer in humans, which we also know our companion animals also get PTSD.
Yes.
But we look at cancer research and we understand the concept of epigenetics, that your body is always changing to the environment around you, and it affects the chemistry that affects you at the fundamental genetic level. And it's a very, very powerful concept that can give you a greater tendency or proclivity to getting cancer. So I would imagine that would be certainly the case with severe trauma, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They've even found in studies that children that have been exposed to trauma, their DNA is altered because of that exposure. And that's where we run into things like generational trauma. And your parents will literally have the ability to genetically pass on the trauma that they experience to their offspring, right? So, I mean, it absolutely creates the very basic level alterations. It's very powerful.
Well, how common is PTSD and TBI in the military and in veterans? How common do you see that? How often do you see that?
So the trick with brain injuries is there are so many individuals who have not been diagnosed with traumatic brain injury. The problem there is that a lot of the symptoms that come with TBI, mild or moderate, tend to overlap or also be some symptoms that you see that come with PTSD. So often they'll be diagnosed with PTSD, but not with a brain injury. But we see about a little less than a quarter of all veterans that have served that actually report having PTSD. And again, even with that, not all of them receive care or diagnosis for it. The problem that can happen with that is that you see, and this happened a lot in the Vietnam era, is then you're on your own with trying to cope with that, and you develop maladaptive coping mechanisms like substance abuse, alcoholism, things like that. Thankfully, nowadays we have a lot more and resources to be able to provide interventions earlier for veterans, even when they're still serving before they come out, so that that doesn't happen as frequently.
Absolutely. And there's some wonderful programs out there. That's wonderful. So I guess what I'm trying to arrive at is how big the population is, how big the need is. And so 25, you think 25%, that's a pretty big number, right? In the military.
Yes.
Yeah. So
70% of the population are veterans overall. So that's a large number.
Did you say not all the I missed what you said.
7% of our national population are veterans.
Okay. 7% of our national population are veterans, right? So whatever the adult population is, that's a very, very big number. So how big? Well, that's a good time to talk about how big your organization is. How many veterans have you found service dogs? Well, I guess before we jump into that, I want to talk about dogs in the healing process because I find that to me, that's just a really powerful concept and something that I've witnessed and experienced it firsthand. So what do you learn and what do you do what have you seen in the foundation in terms of the stories you've seen and how dogs and companion animals can help a veteran suffering from PTSD and TBI?
So we believe in a bond-based model, which means that our program starts with that relationship between the veteran and the dog. All of our training is non-aversive, positive reward-based training and bond-based. One of the things that we hear a lot from veterans is that because our model is so different, we don't use a traditional service dog training model in that we get all of our dogs from local shelters. And we have the dog and the veteran choose one another. So we pre-screen a group of dogs that are appropriate candidates for that veteran. And then they get to meet all of those dogs. And then the pair, how they pair up is that's the dog, that's their dog, right? So that's where that bond piece starts. And a lot of veterans talk about how meeting that dog who's been in a shelter and has their own past, their own stuff, and having been sort of left behind, they often feel like kindred spirits, like they understand each other right away. And from that point, the veteran is training that dog with our trainers in a co-trainer model. So we don't actually train the dogs in advance and then give them to a handler. Our program can take around 12 months for them to fully train their dog. And by them being so involved in this process, it not only helps with developing skills to manage memory issues, but also just cognitive processing and learning and repetition and creating routines, but they have an intimate understanding of their dog and how to continue working with them. It helps build a stronger bond. And all the while, they're gradually going into more and more challenging locations out in public that they would normally isolate from because as they are learning more advanced skills with their dog, they're also going into more difficult locations. And that in and of itself is a benefit for them getting used to being in environments that they would not normally have the coping mechanisms to be able to be present there.
Yeah, that's 12 months. That's tremendous. That's a wonderful program that you have. I also find it fascinating and wonderful that you get your population of service dogs from local shelters. And Ginger can speak more knowledgeably about that because she used to run the Humane Society in Memphis, here in Memphis, Tennessee. But I would imagine that there are a lot of people that train service dogs that actually have them bred for that. So Ginger, you'd like to take over here?
Well, yeah, I think a lot of the dogs that we had that came into the Humane Society would have been great for people with PTSD because they were very intuitive to, just to watch. I could see them reacting with other dogs, with other people, with other people besides me, how caring and loving they were towards the people who were handling them. It was really kind of eye-opening. I've always been a dog and cat lover, but working at the Humane Society just really kind of opened me up to like hundreds of them, so that I could see and just see how they worked well. And it was really, really great. And I saw we had a program there where we trained the inmates at the local prison that were tried as adults, but they were under 18. And so they would come in, and just watching them work with the dogs was amazing. How you would see, of course, the first group all came in together, and then new people would come in, new young gentlemen would come in. But watching them, the transformation in those inmates was absolutely amazing. And even the warden said that because of that program, they had less altercations back over at the prison. So it was great. The whole program was wonderful.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, the value, I guess, of the magic of companionship is just life altering and changing. It has been for me. I wasn't always a dog guy. I guess I was in my 20s when an ex gave me my first dog in my entire first life and my entire adult life. And I immediately realized it was going to be a tremendous challenge. It was Malcolm, my first Great Pyrenees. And I don't know if you know anything. Well, of course you do. I forgot to stop and introduce Milo. So that's a perfect segue into introducing. There you go. All right. So tell us about Milo.
He's snoozing right now. Hi, Milo. So Milo was just selected by a new client, and hopefully he gets to go home today or tomorrow with him. He came from a local shelter. He was an owner surrender, and he is pretty sure he's a full Great Pyrenees, which doesn't happen very often. Most of the dogs that we get are some sort of a Heinz 57 mutt, which I love mutts. So he's just hanging out with me today while we wait on his veterinary screening to come through and give him the green light.
Well, congratulations.
Imagine he would be great.
Yeah,
well,
absolutely great. They're wonderful dogs. I just love,
really
I love Piers.
I'm going to give you the ... Yes, congratulations. And however, even if he is mostly Piers, he's going to present some type of problem, and he's going to be a challenge because let me tell you what, I'm on my 5th Great Pyrenees. And someone asked me, I don't even know how I became a Pyrenees guy, but I love it to death. But I also, at the same time, they irritate me to no end. So
I want to know how we have to do a follow-up because I want to know how the training goes.
Well, that's actually what I was going to talk about, your success rate, your success and failure rate now. But with Pyrenees, I imagine your failure rate's going to go up, your success rate's going to go down. But in all seriousness, and back to the story about Malcolm and how it relates to that, is that Malcolm was a tremendous challenge for me, and he almost was. Even though an ex-girlfriend of mine gifted him to me, I swear to God, I said, no, I didn't want him, but I ended up with him anyway. He was all of like a few months old and just a terrorist, even at that age. And so I ended up with him. And so it almost was a fail. I almost tried to give them away to my parents. My parents said, absolutely not. I tried to give them to some other friend. I tried to give them back to my ex. And she was like, no, 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 I gave them to you. It's your problem, not mine. And just tried to kick the proverbial can down the road, made somebody else's problem, but I ended up with him anyway. And I absolutely fell in love with him, and we bonded. He fell in love with me. I'm convinced of that. I'm not entirely certain even to this day, but it changed my life. And so it has healed me. The power and the magic of dogs and companionship has healed me in so many ways. And so that's why I applaud you, and I find it so wonderful what you do there at Paws and Stripes. So let's talk about the I guess maybe the tough aspect of what you do, in that the reality is there are successes and failures. So I'm just sort of curious, because I'm a curious sort, and I've always tried to understand things scientifically, and because that your service dog pool is drawn from shelters and rescues, have you found in your 12 years, does that lend itself to what you found is a greater success rate when you try to partner a companion with a veteran, or do you find that maybe it's a little bit more challenging, Lindsey?
I would say that it's the same in terms of how much we deal with that can be difficult, is probably about the same as traditional organizations. It's just different problems. Traditional organizations, they're going to do puppy raising, and they still have, I believe the last percentage that I'm aware of is about 42% attrition of dogs before they from the time they're puppies, making it all the way to even being able to be paired with a handler. Dogs are individuals. So not all of them want to work, not all of them can work, and that's fine. I think that we have a very different set of challenges because we do get them from shelters. We don't always know what their entire history is. And the thing with dogs is sometimes they'll have some issues that don't show up until a little bit later, once they've really settled into the new home. Our attrition rate for a while was about a third. So it was kind of on par with what we could expect in the industry. And we have different protocols for how to address that. A lot of times we'll pair them with a new dog. But now we have more options. We have what's called a companion animal program. So in some cases, we might have a veteran who's not sure if they really need a service dog. They can come into a companion animal program with a pet, and they do some pet enrichment bonding training, but it's paired with therapy. So it's kind of like the service dog program light, if you will. And we might have someone who's coming into a year-long program to train a service dog. During that process, they might find that both they and that dog, maybe this is not actually the route that is best for them. And then we're able to plug them into a different program, and we still get them services. We still have them involved in our peer network and therapy and all of these things, but they don't necessarily graduate with the dog being a service dog. So our attrition rate's gone down because what we did is we created alternative options for clients and for dogs.
That's wonderful and very, very necessary in this society, I would imagine. But I was just about to rather cutely refer to it as a try it before you buy it sort of. I love it.
Hey, sometimes that's helpful.
It is actually now in today's e-commerce world. You now see that they're sending you attire, dress wear. Whatever you want to buy and try on, they'll send it to you to try on. And if it doesn't work, you just ship it back. So it's probably that's going to work. And I'm going to get to it later. Don't want to get it to it right now, but I want to discuss the challenges of building a nonprofit in this increasingly challenging world. And that's one of it, is how do you adapt to modern times. And so I love that program. Anything that you can do to increase and improve your success rate and your success numbers, that's what you've got to do. I also want to talk about the other side, or just as an aside, mention the other upside to pulling from that pool of shelter dogs, existing shelter dogs and rescue dogs, is that's a very, as we all know, that's a very, very large population that can very easily if you can find a very efficient way, you can very easily get it from the shelter environment to the veteran, right? It's all about that transaction, right? How do you make that pipeline from need to demand? How do you make that much more efficient and cost effective? So I'm a big fan of your model. I like it, and I'm glad it's working for you.
So far, so good. 12 years in. So
That's that's a testament. I think anytime you get past year 10, you could just you can never go phew, but at least past 10 years you go, okay, I've passed a milestone, right, Ginger?
sure.
Exactly. So I did have a question. So when you're looking at the animals in the shelter, what are you looking for? Like particular personalities? Is it some that maybe have been fostered, so you know a little bit more about them? Tell us how you pick, how you choose.
So it's actually case by case. When we do a screening for dog candidates for a client, we have already done a whole lot of work to glean information from that client about what their needs are, their limitations, even so much as to how tall the dog needs to be, things like that.
Okay.
So we have a pretty specific criteria that we'll use based on that individual, and that will very clearly delineate just sort of what we need to be on the lookout for. And it may even include details like they have a family member in the household that was attacked as a child by a black dog, and so they're terrified of black dogs. So we won't pull any black dogs, right? So we want to take all these things into consideration, but we do multiple steps, if you will, when we're screening. We've been working with our local shelters for such a long time that we have their staff sort of do the preliminary check on things like initial health screening, age, certain size, hard lines around temperament. So for example, if we need a dog that's a little more, so we have, this is probably our 5th Pyrenees that we've had come through the program, or Pyrenees mix. They're usually mixes. They tend to be way more laid back than some other breeds, than say like a shepherd mix, right? And this client that we were choosing for really needed a more laid back demeanor because of some limitations. And so he was a great candidate for that. So that would be something that we would first talk to the shelter staff about, and then they would give us a list. And then our trainers would spend a few days going to the shelter and doing various temperament testings, seeing how responsive they are to different cues, checking to see where they're at in terms of socialization around other animals and other people, and handling drills, reactivity testing, lots of things like that. And we'll do that at the shelter. And once we've sort of created, okay, these dogs are really good candidates to introduce, then we have the facilities bring those dogs here, and we'll do the introductions and our actual dog selection on site here.
Okay, cool.
One of the other programs that I like that it seems like you have is a suicide prevention program. Is that correct from your website? Tell us about that. I find that to be very powerful and important.
So we lose about 20 veterans a day. And this has been very much an epidemic for quite some time. And so suicide prevention has been an integral piece of what we provide within the mental health services that we do. It just is built in naturally because we run into it so frequently, whether it's interacting with clients who are showing they have suicidal ideation, or that are dealing with having lost a friend who died by suicide, and so on. What we've done recently is we've really expanded to bring on a support group as well that it doesn't matter if you're a veteran or you're a family member or somebody that's just been affected by that, you can come and participate in that group. That's our Positive Life group. But every week we have, as a part of our program, we have what we call workshop. And in workshop, we have some psych ed. So psych education, we learn something, whether it's a skill or learning kind of about whether it's suicide or learning about this thing that comes with PTSD and so on. But we also incorporate learning different ways of managing that and also processing that. And suicide comes up as just a piece of that we deal with on the reg. We deal with that also individually in therapy. So our clinicians working with our clients individually. So we have sort of that group setting and that individual setting. And we have a peer-to-peer mentor program where graduates will stick around as mentors really and provide peer support to current clients so that they're really developing that community. And that community is one of the most powerful tools with both coping with loss and also to prevent loss. And we do provide a service called QPR. QPR is a method. It's called question, persuade, and refer. It's a way of learning how to deal with suicidality when it comes up. If you're interacting with somebody and you realize that they're suicidal, what do you do? So we train all of our staff, we train our clients, and we offer that as a free training to the public as well.
Oh, that's great.
Have you, and since your inception, and I would imagine that there are some organizations out there doing similar things. So collectively, have you seen that these programs that partner companion animals with veterans that have PTSD and TBI, are we seeing a drop in suicide? Do we have that data that we can look at and say yes?
I don't know that we definitively have that data, but I mean, I would say undoubtedly yes.
Well, I would too. I would too, because I know the loss of my three love my boys, Malcolm, Hudson, and Murphy, have profoundly changed my life, but profoundly saddened my life. And I've had tough times in my life. But I know that whenever I felt like the handful of times that I felt like, man, I'm losing it. I'm losing it. I always had my Fuzzybutts that were with me at the time that I felt were the bottom rung, right? That kept me, they were always my bottom rung. And so I would imagine it would be a good thing though, I would think though, and maybe something that you could put on your should list though. As Ginger, she always says, don't ever should me. Don't get me. You should do this. You should do that. But I'm a should guy.
Should on you.
Don't should on me. I always have a should. Ginger, you should do that. We should do this, Ginger. But I do believe in the power of data. And it's a difficult number to track, but it would be a powerful one because I know instinctively. I actually am a dog. I was born in 1970, and that was the year of the dog. And I do believe that's no coincidence to who I am. So I would imagine that we would see some serious data that having a companion, and when you have such a profoundly effective disease that can affect your overall disposition and how you view life, right? Which is the thing, because sometimes when you have that condition, you don't go through desperation and sad times the way other people do. And having that bottom rung that you can hold on to, like when I love that metaphor, like when you're going through rough waters, you got that bottom rung, right, to hold on to of the ladder. So I think it has to be over 50%. I would probably be higher than that. And I don't even know why I'm venturing a guess at what that number would be, but it would be high.
We hear a lot from clients saying that if they hadn't done this program, they wouldn't still be here. We hear that a lot.
Thank you for what you do as a person who's dealt with sadness, profound sadness in my life. Thank you for that. You do that because that's above and beyond what I would think that an organization such as yourself would normally provide, I would imagine. So one of the other programs that I wanted to talk about, Lindsey, and I was curious about is the Positive Life Group. Talk to us about that.
So that's our suicide support group.
Oh, that is the group. Okay.
Yeah. And we opened that up to family members as well as veterans because suicide affects everyone.
Okay. So the program you have is for the actual individuals and the group itself for the support system. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. And then the last thing that I saw on the website that I wanted to go over that I thought was interesting that you do is training service dogs for veterans. Is that just for any veterans as a group, or is that something that specifically that you offer as an additional service?
So training the service dogs, that's our flagship program. That's what we've been doing consistently for 12 years, and incorporating the other services, the companion animal program, and then just therapy on its own without working with dogs. Those are sort of new additions that we've added, because while training the service dogs is an incredibly powerful thing for many veterans, it doesn't necessarily fit into every veteran's life, nor is it what every veteran needs. So they need options. But we have been doing this for 12 years with shelter dogs. And it takes it, when we first started, the program didn't take quite as long, but now that we've integrated all of these additional elements, it does take about a year for them to complete and be graduated with a fully trained service dog.
That's wonderful. Talk to us about, I'd love to hear some success stories. So
Yeah, that's what I was just going to ask myself.
we can talk turkey all day long and talk about, all the wonderful services, and that's great. I just want to make sure that I went through all the bullet points, because Ginger would yell at me and say you didn't go with this, and I would get in trouble. So I didn't have them ordered right in my notes. I apologize, as that was for the signature at the top. But what we really want, I think the audience wants to hear, and are the wonderful success stories. So if you could share some of those with us, that'd be great.
Just a whole bunch pop in my head every time I get asked this question. So we have a couple graduates that work in schools as teachers as well. And one of the really neat things to see is a lot of clients like to send us photos too, right? We have stories from them going. So one in particular, he works with in special education with special needs students. And while his dog is his service dog, he has found on many occasions that having his dog with him when he's dealing with really difficult situations with students has been incredibly beneficial for that student, even to just anchor themselves by interacting with the dog. We've had, and the similar story, we have another graduate who has special needs children of his own children. And the dog sort of became both his service dog and almost like a service dog to his kids, because of how attached he was to the children. But a lot of children with autism benefit from working with dogs. And this really kind of led into his whole family just doing so much more than just helping him with PTSD. We have a graduate who she did her final with all 5 children with her. She passed. She went to law school, has since graduated, and now she is a practicing attorney, and she works to provide assistance to veterans who need help with her dog in the courtroom, which is pretty cool. We also have clients who've gone to school to be social workers so that they can pay it forward that way as well. We hear a lot of stories about them finishing and they want to keep going, and they will find their way to kind of plug back in and keep working with peers so that they can sort of pass on this like healing that they experience to other people, which is really one of the most beautiful things to see.
It is.
So, Luke, I'm going to interrupt for a second.
Go ahead, please.
You know how I always have to interject something about Pete there. So Pete was a therapy dog, and it was really interesting because he was one of the first ones that went into St. Jude. And one day I was given a presentation about the therapy dogs in front of a lot of people from radio stations, because they did the whole radiothon thing for St. Jude. And they also introduced one of the cancer patients and his parents. And afterwards, it was really cute because somebody came up and they said, we could see that. We saw exactly what Pete does, because the little boy was clinging to his parents and had his head turned and he wouldn't look at them. And then when he realized that Pete was on the stage with him, he just walked over to Pete and started loving on him. So I can imagine how those teachers really use the dogs in the classroom too, to kind of calm down the kids. I think it's great.
Which is an unexpected thing for them, right?
Yeah.
That's not something that they ever really thought about when they were going through the program to train them as their service dog. And it's just really beautiful to see the way that it can blossom to something even greater than that, which is already a lot.
Yeah, it's great to see the benefit of having dogs everywhere. You know, I mean, just they're great. I love dogs.
I'm a fan also. Yeah.
Well, let's hope that Milo is another one of your success stories, because every time you keep saying peer support, I keep thinking Pyrenees support. I got the Pyrenees,
I did too.
I get the Pyrenees in my ear. Well, Lindsey, you've been doing a wonderful job. You really have, building a great operation for 12 years. So let's talk about what would you say are some of the challenges that you've experienced experiencing right now, you have experienced, and then more importantly, how people can help out?
You know, I think like a lot of nonprofits, 2020 was rough. So we've sort of been breathing new life into our fundraising efforts. This year was the first year since 2019 that we were able to have our annual gala. So that was a really big deal. We got to see each other in person again, and just kind of getting back to the things that we used to do to fundraise and to re-engage people. We've been building back up our volunteer base, because again, a lot of that kind of dwindled during COVID, and we went fully remote for a good chunk of that time. So really just still kind of, and even though we're not in the same place globally that we were in 2020, we are still reckoning with COVID outbreaks, right? So there's sort of this ebb and flow of someone's been exposed or someone's sick or whatever it might be. And we have to be really careful on how that might pose safety risks with our clients. So we do have to be very agile as an organization. And that can pose some real challenges from time to time. Being able to bring people in to see what we do and really understand who we are as an organization and who our clients are is, I think, invaluable, because that engages people and helps us build our donor base and build our support base. Because even though we work with veterans, and that may be 7% of the population, veterans impact all of our lives, and we all have some sort of a connection. They're a part of our communities, they're a part of our workforce, they're a part of our education system. And when they isolate, we lose just this amazing resource, because they have such experience and they're invaluable. So we want to bring them back into our communities, and we want to connect that. And this makes it so that we can do that by having them have these dogs that can help them and being able to develop these tools and healing. So I think getting the community more involved, and also getting the word out that we are doing more than just training service dogs now, that veterans can come to us for psych ed, they can come to us for support groups, just therapy, they can come with a pet and do a 3-month pet program. I think that given that we for so long have done really one primary program, just getting that information out there for people to know that we're doing even more than that now, that so that we can have more people come to us for service is also a new thing we're trying to tackle.
Right. Ginger can certainly speak better than I can about fundraising the last couple of years. Ginger, if you have something to contribute to that topic.
Yeah, it has been difficult, especially since everything that we do involves the public, you know, and volunteers, participants in our walks. It's been a challenge.
That's why we didn't really name the organization Puppy Up, because I come from Texas, and down there they say man up or cowboy up, and the heck with those guys. We're all about puppy up when we have cancer, so it's always puppy up to cancer, right? But we've certainly now realized we've had to all puppy up. Nonprofits have had to totally puppy up the last couple of years during the pandemic. But we soldier on. That's kind of our job, is we all have to weather hard times, and we have to adapt to different environments, and that's what we have to do. But I forgot to mention at the beginning, or I didn't really forget. I was sort of looking for the time to, but as we're talking about fundraising and fundraisers, I wanted to talk about one of your supporters, because that's how we got connected, because Ginger and I didn't have any prior knowledge of Paws and Stripes, or certainly you, Lindsey. That's no statement on you, but we exist in mostly the dog cancer world, or the animal cancer world, although Ginger still is very active in rescues and shelters. And even here at her house, she's doing that on a weekly basis. It's always filled with whatever critters that she can stuff in here. But I want to go back to how we all got connected, and that's one of your supporters. His name happens to be Earl. And are you talking about Earl, right? Did you know that? Did you know that's how we got connected?
No.
Oh, that's funny.
Did you? You didn't tell Lindsey that that's how we made that. That's why we. That's how.
You
we
know, I think originally I wasn't corresponding with Lindsey, so I think maybe it got lost in the translation.
Well, okay. Somehow I was setting up a joke that now got a little bit went sideways a little bit, but I'm going to try to get back on course because Earl he's in the military, and I'm quite certain he doesn't have it. He's also been on Fuzzybutts and Friends. You can find his episode because of his organization and his work with Frunk Puppy and also Doge and Tesla. And we had him on for a number of reasons. He's a great guy. I love him to death. And I'm one of his super followers on Twitter. I'm happy.
I love it.
Yes, we follow his travels. But what I was going to say is that I'm quite certain after interviewing him for an hour, he doesn't have PTSD yet. But after now being in Alaska for maybe a couple of weeks, I start showing signs of PTSD. So I love Earl and I follow his kids, Wilson and Norman and his family. They're wonderful people. So that's how we got connected. He's a great guy and he talks wonderfully about Paws and Stripes.
You know, I did an interview with Floki where I had met him, right? Yeah, it was one of the most fun interviews I've ever done because what an awesome group of guys.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, yeah. It really is. And what's interesting is I'm now I'm about to start another walk for this one for canine cancer treatment. And so I'm having to get back on all the social media channels. And that includes Twitter. And I have a love-hate relationship with Twitter because my first walk, Twitter was just starting out, and I was trying to tell my story chronologically, and they just kept screwing it all up. And so I couldn't ever get people to come to my events because they would post the tweet after the event, and it would mess everything up. And so I would drop on and off with Twitter. But now that I'm back on and getting to know some of the groups, you know, the shelter groups have always been strong on Twitter. And I would imagine you would find that the case with the veterans and the military groups have always been strong. They're always strong on all of the social medias. But what I find I love about Twitter now are really the two dominant dog groups or animal groups are the Doge and the Frunk puppy groups. And they're fun. They bring fun and flavor to Twitter because normally hyper political place and I don't go to Twitter for that nonsense.
Right.
Oh, I'm glad that we brought that in because Earl is wonderful. I'm going to share this part of the episode with them. I look forward to that.
That's fantastic.
Good. All right. So as we wrap things up, Lindsey, I like to open up this portion of the podcast episode to you to talk about. If you have any messages to veterans, pet parents, and also about your organization, please.
Oh, wow, man, where to start?
Well, let's start with message to veterans because that would be the group that you would need to speak to most is that veterans. So what would be your message through Fuzzybutts and Friends to your message to veterans?
So I'll tell you a little story to get to my message. Our logo, our Paws and Stripes logo, it's basically, I feel like a dog bark might be about to happen. Maybe not. Okay.
You have a peer in there, so.
I know. And he's watching another dog walk by. So I was kind of waiting for it to happen. But our logo it's basically a flag with a paw where the stars would be, American flag, which seems very literal because we work with dogs and veterans, right? But it looks similar to the IR flag that when the Army deploys, they change their embroidered color flag patch on their uniform to an IR flag, an infrared patch, before they go overseas. And in my experience, when I was an Army wife, an active duty Army wife in Kansas, and we were at Fort Riley where the big red one is, they started for the first time in my experience deploying troops to go over. And I remember noticing that patch change, and I had asked them why they changed it. And they told me that's so we can see each other with infrared when we're over there. We know who the friendlies are. And this image is kind of really stuck with me. And that's what really inspired sort of the simple logo that I put together for Paws. Is it's like a new deployment, it's a new mission, but it's also how you know where the friendlies are. And I think that one of the things that a lot of veterans might experience is regardless of why, but being isolated, being separated from that community that was so strong when you were in the service. That community is still out there, and there are still people who are showing up every day for you and for your families. You're not by yourself. You're not alone, even if it feels that way. We're out here, whether it's Paws or there's so many other groups, there's so many of us out here that have dedicated our lives to it. And so I think my message to veterans is you're not alone. There's four-leggeds and there's two-leggeds that we're here and we're ready for you. And I think that just remembering you're not by yourself and it's not hopeless. There is hope out there. Sometimes that's all you need, just to hang on a little bit longer until you can get that help.
Yeah, and companions make a world of difference, can make a lifetime difference, as a matter of fact, as we would say. So one other question and sort of afterthought I was having. I said, listen, what a wonderful, powerful message that you have. And I think I forgot to ask you, is that, are you limited then to veterans with PTSD and TBI that are in sort of a geographical area for you? Is that sort of a rate limiting step to your model? And if so, then how can, I guess scaling would be a concern. And how do you scale that message? How do you scale what you're doing, Lindsey?
Oof. So we really primarily serve New Mexico. New Mexico has an enormous veteran population in its state. And so, we don't usually have a hard time with having clients come to us. But yeah, we are really limited to the state here. We do work specifically with veterans who have PTSD plus whatever else, which is most. But there's other organizations across the country that provide similar services to us. We're one of many accredited organizations in this country by Assistance Dogs International. So if you're looking for a service dog, there's a whole roster online with ADI for what organizations are in your state that you can go to that train military PTSD service dogs, specifically the type of dog that you're looking for. But even if you don't need a service dog, especially since COVID, I think that nationally there's been a lot more emphasis on making sure that there's availability of mental health resources for everybody, whether you're a veteran or not. Because one of the groups that we don't talk about a lot is the support system of veterans. And they often are invisible, they get forgotten about, but they are just as in need of these services as veterans are. Concurrent PTSD, having secondary PTSD is something that's very real, that affects kids and it affects partners and family members. So reaching out to your local VA to get resources both in and outside of network there, and also checking to see what resources your state provides. New Mexico is awesome because they started this year to where if you have insurance, you don't have to pay a copay or deductibles or anything to receive behavioral health. Is completely covered and no out-of-pocket costs for New Mexico residents. And I hope there's more states that are also doing things like that to make it more accessible for people.
Well, this is a very important topic because I know we have audience members and at least supporters of the foundation and all the work that we've done over the years for companions with cancer that are outside of New Mexico. So this is a very important part of the program. So where would they go, Lindsey? Where can, if they're listening to this program and thinking, wow, this is just a wonderful, beautiful message that she has. And I believe now that the companionship having a service dog could help me where I'm at in my life. But I don't live in New Mexico or the service area. Where would they go, Lindsey? Is there a website that they could go, a resource that they could find?
So they can go to ADI's website. And we actually believe we have that on our website. We have a resources page on our website that they can go to, but you can also, it doesn't matter if you live in New Mexico, you can still call our office or email us, and we can still help direct you where you need to go. And we can also answer some pretty standard questions about service dogs. If you're not sure if you need one and you just need to process that, we can help with that too. So we can still be a resource for individuals regardless of where they live, and point them in the right direction and connect them to those organizations that are going to be closest to them.
That's wonderful. That's really wonderful that you do that. So tell us again what your website is.
Our website is www.pawsandstripes.org, all spelled out.
Excellent. Lindsey, did I miss anything? Did we leave anything out?
I don't think so.
Okay. If I did, you certainly are a friend of the Fuzzybutts. You're most welcome to come back on, if only just for an update, or if you got some wonderful, wonderful Fuzzybutts stories. If you want to tell us about Milo, you want to send pictures and just say, hey, I want to just pop in and tell you about Milo and how he's doing.
Yes.
Wonderful.
I definitely want training updates on Milo.
Yes. You're famous
Look
now.
at that handsome boy. There he is.
Cute.
He's sitting very proper.
All I can say is, even if he's mostly in trouble, his friends, I mean, if I kind of got that wrong. Even if he's mostly Pyrenees, they're mostly in trouble. That's what I meant to say. But I love Pyrenees. Okay, Ginger, we're at that point of the episode, the program, when now I check in with you. Did I leave anything out? Or do you have a cancer tip for us this week?
I do have a
good. I'm glad to hear that. So let me set it up properly. At this time of Fuzzybutts and Friends, we'd like to take a second to remember the fact that even though we have a whole host of different guests on this program talking about a whole host of different subjects, we're all still about cancer and our companion animals. So we take a moment out and have the Puppy Up Foundation present our cancer tip of the week. Ginger, please.
I need a drum roll.
We do need intro music for that. I need to set it up better. Go ahead.
Well, Luke, and I have, lots of dogs, and lots of dogs come through here, and they always have stinky breath. But sometimes their breath is really stinky. And, you think that, oh, it's something they ate, or it's just a dog and they have stinky breath. But really, if it's persistent, we really need to have it checked out, because it could be one, they just need to have their teeth cleaned, which would be great. Or there could be a tumor in their mouth that's causing that, or they could actually have a stomach issue that's causing the stinky breath. So it's not just a stinky breath. If it's bad and it persists, you should really have your dog checked out by a veterinarian and have that taken care of. That's my tip.
That's a wonderful tip, because as we know, if it is oral melanoma, some of those can be crazy aggressive and they get out of control very fast, and you just have nothing. There's nothing to do. There's no medical option at all. So even the stinky breaths, you got to go get them checked out. Thank you, Ginger, and thank you to the Puppy Up Foundation for our weekly cancer tip. And on that note, I'd like to thank our audience for joining in this episode. Puppy Up. Talk soon.